Catholic Social Services has been serving Guam for decades. On Something to Talk About today, Executive Director Diana Calvo and Trustee Peter John Camacho talk about some of the programs that have been established to respond to the social issues that have developed over the years and accepting that these problems exist in our culture at all. That's ahead on Something to Talk About. Welcome to King's Restaurant and Something to Talk About. Thank you for joining us tonight. Like we said, some great folks from the Catholic Social Services taking some time out of their busy day to talk to us about the services that are ordered by the Catholic Social Services and what you can do to either get involved or be a recipient of the services, which is everything that you guys are about. Diana Calvo is the head person in charge, and then Peter John Calvo. Camacho, Peter John Camacho. I got to do that again. Don't make me say Calvo. Yeah. Let me just pick it up from Peter John. Okay. All right, Diana. Let me pick it up from there. Diana Calvo, who is the head honcho there, and then Peter John Camacho, who used to be the deputy and now has moved on to the Guam Memorial Hospital, as you might know. But you still roped him in, kept your tabs on him, so you're on the board of trustees now for Catholic Social Services. Do you mind if I just start real quickly, Peter John? You know, you having been a person who left the organization for another call to duty in public service, you felt still very closely attached to the service that you wanted to remain with some involvement. Yeah, yes. It's a personal thing for you then.
Yes, it is. Having worked in public health previously and then at the hospital, we've always been aware of Catholic Social Service as an organization providing different things in the community. But having had the opportunity to work there, Patty, is just it's really eye-opening. And I will always credit my boss for something that she shared with me that, just really hit home. And I guess being at the hospital or public health is with Catholic Social Service, for a lot of folks in our community, Catholic Social Service is the last stop. And her vision and her mantra, her message to all of us is, she would never want us to say to someone, "I'm sorry, we can't help you."
That's a good point, because I don't think that's ever been put in that perspective, that people who have come to you at that point have come to you in a very, very desperate, helpless point.
Yeah. In the different programs that we administer, it's individuals who have either hit rock bottom, they've been evicted, so they're homeless, they're a victim of abuse, neglect, or domestic violence, or they're just individuals who are experiencing so much stress in their life, that they recognize, I might do something that is going to harm myself, my family, and when they go to government agencies, there's a level of services provided, but at 5 o'clock it ends. For the nonprofits, we are really grassroots providers. And as a social worker, it should not be in our vocabulary that there's nothing more that we can do, because there's always something we can do. And there's always interim solutions while we plan for the more permanent solution. Yeah. And when we're it, then we have to come up with very creative ways to respond to the needs of our individuals.
That's exactly, to respond to the needs. Yeah. The Catholic Social Services has been in operation for 37 years, and one of the first programs ever introduced was the Alley Shelter, right? That was the first real program that came.
Our first program was a drop-in center for homeless individuals with substance issues.
Okay.
And then from there, we branched into elder Title III Elderly
Sure,
Services,
sure.
and then Ali.
And then Ali,
Ali.
35 years with Ali.
35 years to
with
this
operating.
year.
That was probably, I don't know if you can describe this need. I mean, 35 years ago, when you think about, the state of our community, where a program like that had to have been established, you can only imagine now, 35 years later, that we are still addressing that need and still responding to that need.
Yes, and around that time, I was just a new social worker.
You were just a baby in high school.
One of my, even as a social work student, in my placement, I was working on spousal abuse cases, which was the term at that time. And then coming out of it, it's like, it was a sense of culture shock for me personally, because I didn't grow up in that kind of environment. And then to see Chamorro women primarily with bruises and open wounds, and just to hear some of their stories, it's really like, it's gut-wrenching to me, who I'm a young student, I'm about to be a new mom, and then I'm thinking, at some future point in time, could I also be a victim? It's kind of like that.
Well, the other really awkward realization is maybe in some areas of our community, we didn't know that stuff existed, right?
Yes.
Because it was really held very close to the chest. It was a family secret. And so you didn't report it to police. So there were no real reports of these kinds of crimes. So back then, to establish a shelter where women could go, was it difficult back then to engage women or to let them know this is a safe house for you?
I think it was. The Sisters of the Good Shepherd Order were the founders of Ali Shelter, and they actually had worked with the Father David I. Kittigwa, who is now Monsignor David I. Kittigwa, and he was the executive director at that time. And they had collaborated to establish the shelter, and it was set up just to be, a kind of safe haven for a day or two, while women kind of regroup, because then, back then, divorce was not an issue.
Yeah.
And these things are kept within the family. It's really not a public issue that's brought up. And so I'm sure there were challenges just trying to deal with the culture itself on how they view couples' relationships, and how, the response is, which is let them handle it, don't get involved,
And for even a couple of days away from the loved one, that presents its own emotional drama, to be away and hidden off someplace that nobody could find, the victim. That probably was tough to get used to also.
And I think the emotional trauma is still the same today.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest differences is that there's more education awareness about the resources available to victims. And it's not saying that you should terminate your relationship. It is saying that if you love each other, then violence is not part of that love connection.
Yeah.
And that there's other ways that we can help you to deal with stress, to deal with your anger, so that, that's a natural emotion.
Sure.
But there are different ways that you can channel it so that you're not physically harming someone else, someone that you say you love, And the church's stance before, I think, was pretty silent on that, but it's been more vocal.
Something have to address.
In terms of, we do not condone the violence, and divorce is not even an issue. It's really an issue about safety.
So I got to ask you, that's a fine point, because we remember this is a Catholic social services built upon the doctrine of the Catholic faith, and tell me, has the church matured along? And this is not a criticism; it's just the reality of in a sleepy community that we grew up in. Has the church been forced to sort of grow up and to address these very, very private problems that that the church never necessarily took a stand on before, but it was forced to have to be a voice in the community to let women know that family violence is unacceptable, and and while divorce was not something that the Catholic Church stands behind, they have to recognize that this is a social problem that extends even to Catholics.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Patty. The church, in wanting to continue to be relevant to its members, those are issues that need to be addressed, and the Holy Father is very at the forefront, leading us and saying, these are the things that we need to be mindful of. And so addressing family violence, domestic violence issues is an important thing, and the service, again, provided by Ali Shelter is, has grown and has evolved since those very early days.
And we had an anniversary mass on the Feast of St. Joseph on March 19, which is the anniversary day for Ali Women's Shelter. And Monsignor David Kirigua, gave a beautiful homily and spoke to the challenges of providing a safe haven for victims, and that everybody needs to be involved in helping to strengthen the family and to pray for not only the victim but for the abuser, because that's how they react, and they may be having their hurting inside also, but that's how they respond. And that the only way really that we can address this particular social issue is
to also deal with the perpetrator. That's a fine line, and a lot of people don't feel like that. And the services to the perpetrator are minimal.
And I think over the years, as the government became more involved in addressing social issues through either programs that are funded or trying to come up with coordinated ways, faith-based groups have been involved in helping to evolve the way the helpers respond to it. And I think the inclusion of the faith-based groups is because in some areas, the churches are the ones who harbor the victims and take them in when there is no formal Ali Shelter. And it's that, faith-based community that tries to respond to its own community member. And so, as a Catholic organization, and if we're really following Jesus's model, the people that he gravitated to were those in greatest need.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we're going to take a really quick break, and then when we come back, another growing social issue, unfortunately, is the abuse of the elderly. And there is also, I think, a part of our society that we don't want to hear about, because in our culture it is almost unheard of. But it's a real problem, and it's something that you tackle on a daily basis as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but we also want to engage in the people who you celebrate. The Legacy of Hope is one way throughout the year that you could take a look inside and see some of the people who have been great contributors to the effort. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Is that okay? We're talking with Catholic Social Services, a lumpia break, and we'll be right back. Nice lumpia break. Okay. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us on Something to Talk About. Peter John Camacho and Diana Calvo from Catholic Social Services. We're talking about some of the services that are offered by the organization. And when we, before the break, another heart-wrenching problem that we've had, and it looks like in your timeline that 25 years ago, you were compelled to open up another program that handled the abuse of elderly, and that, I think, next to children, it's a tough one to, in our culture, it is very tough to hear that.
I think when the government enacted the law that established adult protective services, initially it was just a response to referrals that were made for abuse or neglect of individuals with disabilities as well as the elderly. And so if we're using the Child Protective Services model, if there warrants a removal of the individual, to ensure their safety, then you need to have a home. And the emergency receiving home then became an available service, and CSS has been providing that service.
Well, you already knew how to do it,
yeah.
yeah. Well,
For
you already
25 years
knew how to do
yeah.
it with the Ali shelter. But this is a little bit different because the elderly that we're talking about who are people who might be infirmed in some way, they're elderly, they're ill, and you might be shocked, I guess I was, to hear that there are the sick that are elderly sick that are at home all day with really no one to care for them, and
Yes.
they sort of rely on the services of Catholic Social Services to come in and to provide some pretty intimate services of grooming
Yes.
and that sort of thing. Because the families are unavailable to provide that care, or they're
Well, we
they
have
work or
yeah.
something. Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's. I think our life nowadays is so focused on supporting families, and everybody has to work just to survive, I guess. But we also have cases where that employment issue is not addressed, and so we have a lot of elderly who are actually supporting adult children. And in the instances, there's probably a higher percentage of financial abuse against an elderly because family members and even friends and other people take advantage of
Their resources.
of their resources, which then leaves none for the individual. We have cases of actual physical abuse, and then we have cases of neglect. And in the neglect part, these are where you reference, you know, people are just left unattended, and the individual is really not independent enough to take care of themselves. And so if you have nobody and you're not able to do those things, then, you know, sometimes neighbors or the government steps in, there's a referral, and we come in and we provide that emergency sheltering.
How do you know? How do you know where they are? Is it based on the workers that are sent to the homes, or is it mostly reports that come in from people who are in the know of this?
It's all of those. For the clients that we are providing in-home services, they actually will come across those situations, and we do make a report, and APS becomes involved, and if the individual is willing, then we remove them and we shelter them.
Do they report it? Do the elderly victims, do they ever report, or is that very rare? You know what I mean? They're very reluctant to call authorities on their own children.
They will acknowledge the abuse or the neglect, but they will not agree to leave. So sometimes it's a very complex situation because we have to respect the wishes of the elder, especially if they're still able to make decisions.
But if there's abuse, though, I mean, do the authorities step in and make a determination that I mean, or has this ever gone to the way of the court system that you actually had to, you know, physically remove someone as you would a CPS?
There's some involuntary actions taken when we substantiate that the individual does not have, you know, the technical term is they do not have the mental capacity to make a decision. And yes, we do involve the Office of the Public Guardian, and then it may go into a court process.
Is that rare?
It's rare. It's not, there's not as many cases, and only because really the majority of individuals are able to make decisions, and they're caught between that loyalty to family, even though they acknowledge the abuse or the neglect, but they don't want to make it worse than what it is.
Yes, sure.
And so sometimes at some, you know, when there's multiple occurrences, you know, we will try to persuade the individual at least to remove themselves for a while we try to help the family to come
To terms with, okay. Well, you have got every year this opportunity to sing the praises of those who have been supportive of the service and the programs that are available. Peter John Camacho is the chairperson. Is it every year that you're the chairperson of this event,
No,
or
this is
just
my
this
first-
the first time?
This
Because it
time.
felt like last year you were in charge of it, but this time is the first time. Well, because you're not doing anything at the GMH. You know, your time is so
Lots of time.
wide open. The schedule's like, book me to handle this.
Yeah.
So you're the chairperson of Legacy. Tell me about that. Tell me about that event. What makes it so special for you?
Well, it's an opportunity that the organization has to recognize the contributions of individuals who have been an integral part of Catholic social service. This year we're honoring one of our outgoing board members, and then we also have the other honorees are members of our program advisory board. These are community members who work with our programs in reviewing the things that are going on, the activities with the programs, and they are also able to make recommendations to the programs to see if there are any challenges. So it's a really good group. And a lot of these individuals have been there for quite a while, actually,
Wow.
serving in that capacity as a program advisory board member.
There is something about Catholic social services where the people who work there sign on for a really long time. You know what I mean? They take it all the way to the end of the career. And then you have volunteers, or you have people who have volunteered, then you have those who are, that actually are on the front lines going into the homes. It can be very, obviously I can understand the work can be very fulfilling. But in a time where, budget constraints and you're constantly, I'm sure, competing with other nonprofit organizations for the very little money that's out there for these programs, what is it? What's the motivation?
I think that the majority of our volunteers and our supporters and even our staff are focused on being that good neighbor. So regardless of, although we're a Catholic organization, we have individuals who are not Catholics but who still share the same commitment, to helping our brother and sister who are in need. And that's really, the greatest gift. That's God's commandment, and when we say that our God is a God of love, that's how it's translated. That's how it's translated. And there is a very big sense of accomplishment and satisfaction and warmness. Staff tell me day in and day out when they're working with our dementia elderly or individuals with disabilities, it's really hard physical work. And but they don't go and look for another job.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, when we see the progress that this individual has made, and they're able to feed themselves, or the elderly is able to really in the last phase of their life, it's really with dignity. Or the homeless person that we've sheltered, and they are so satisfied that in our shelter they pass on, but they pass on in their sleep. I mean, all of those are kind of like, it gives me goosebumps, it gives them goosebumps. And, my job, our job with Peter John was to ensure that we support our staff in the hard work they do. And we get a big satisfaction. We have a lot of stories. Peter John can share with you some of the experiences he's had, which it shapes you as a person. And, we have our frustrations while we're actually doing the work, but then when we have accomplished our objective with that person and they're at a better place, and then we talk about that experience as part of our debrief or whatever, we're like, we have these little funny tidbits, and one of the stories is we were helping this elderly, previously homeless, and the only one true loyal friend that this individual had was a stray dog that was taken in. And everything revolved around that dog. And, and so sometimes the staff didn't understand, but when I say, what if you have no friend? Like a Charlie Brown thing, I have no friend. But here's this dog, and this dog is the most loyal person. And so, yes, every decision that's going to be made is going to be made on behalf of how we handle that dog. And, Peter John is trying to find other solutions for housing so that we can enable the individual to take the dog in. And then the staff trying to catch the dog. Yeah, we talk about it after the fact, but then when the client feels that they've been really listened to, and then they drop their guard down.
Yeah.
And they allow
Someone's taking them
and they
seriously.
allow us to help them.
Yeah.
Then, you know, that's a big accomplishment.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, you know,
it's fulfilling work, and it's hard not to find these simple moments,
Yes.
right? It's hard not to find them. Well, I tell you, Catholic Social Services has always been very close to my heart, and I truly appreciate the contributions that you make. And well, again, thank you for the contributions and all of the service that you've been providing for 37 years and generations of people. It's quite a feat. Thank you so much. And thank you.
and
for taking
thank
the
you
time.
also, you know, the radio station has really been supportive of Catholic Social Service and the events that are coordinated and but mostly for helping us to spread, you know, awareness about issues where the community as a whole does need to get involved, and also letting people know what resources that are available. And you know, CSS I think tries to be the big brother, big sister among the different nonprofits, because we are a big organization,
And you're older than I.
and we're older, and you
You've
know,
been doing this for a long time. Yeah.
but the legacy really is, as you mentioned, you know, the commitment that people have for the work that we do,
Yeah, I agree.
whether it's the employees, our volunteers, our donors, and our contributors.
Appreciate your time. Peter John, thanks for taking time away from the hospital, and you're a very busy guy up there. And thank you again, Diana. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. And thank you for joining us here on Something to Talk About. We'll see you on the radio.